to keep with you, but we have now got Sajjad Karim has joined us now in the studio here in London. Why don't you want Mr. Juncker when almost everyone else in Europe seems to be gathering around him?
Well, it's quite clear, Andrew. If you look at the most recent European Parliament elections, people are simply not happy with the status quo as it is. And Mr. Juncker is a face from the past, and it's a time now for new faces, new ideas, for a wholesale reform programme to take place. And Mr. Juncker simply is not an individual who has a record that would stand to be tested, that he's the man that can deliver this.
But it seems that Mr. Cameron, Europe is divided over Jean-Claude Juncker. We've just heard from the Greens that they themselves haven't yet made up their minds. But what Mr. Cameron's done, instead of it now being divided against Mr. Juncker, it's united against Mr. Cameron.
Well, what we have done actually at a European level is ensured that this process has become much more transparent. And if you actually have a look at what the treaties say, we've acted in accordance with that. We are making sure that we are taking into account the European Parliament election results, but that the responsibility remains with the heads of state in council, and that consultation takes a part of the process as is required under the Lisbon Treaty. And that is exactly what is happening now.
Sky Keller, let me come back. I hope the line has restored itself. If not Mr. Juncker for the Greens, who? You haven't got another choice, have you?
Well, as I said, we want Mr. Juncker to be nominated by the Council. Yeah. He has the right to, as the first go, try to find a majority in the Parliament. Whether we're part of the majority, we will see. That's linked to the programme, that's linked to it. And I think we will only nominated by the Council for the job. And I mean, I'm sorry, but if the bigger parties did not manage to find among them somebody who is bringing those fresh new ideas, who are new and fresh faces in, then I'm really sorry. The ECR group could have brought forward their own candidate, but Mr. Juncker was backed by many of the heads of planning.
Sky Keller, I really apologise. I'm going to have to interrupt you. I'm fascinated by what you say, but we're only hearing a part of it because there's a technical problem on the line. So I'm afraid we're going to have to leave Berlin. But please come back onto our programme when we get the line sorted out on another day and we can hear your perspective on it. Many apologies to you, but thank you for what you have told us so far. I hope we can get you back on the programme. Where does this leave Mr. Cameron, Iain Martin?
Well, it leaves him isolated. I think perversely, though, in this case, it's probably not a bad place to be.
You mean in terms of domestic politics?
Yeah, domestically, it's. I think it's perfectly healthy that he finds himself in this position. I think for the European Union, though, it's an absolute catastrophe, and this is a very significant, important historical turning point potentially. And it's the week I think that ultimately the door was open to Britain leaving. And I speak as someone who is in favour of reform and trying to stay in, but in choosing Juncker, the rest of Europe is essentially saying that reform option, the kind of reform that Britain wants, is off the table.
I suppose it is. The European election showed, Zoe, that there was a lot of unhappiness with the way Europe is going across the continent at the moment. And some people will see as a bit of a slap in the face that you then choose as the new president someone synonymous with the old way of doing things.
Well, look, he's synonymous with the old way of doing things, but he does have a programme of increased federalism, right? And the European line, which is true, is you can't have a currency that you all share if you don't have other mechanisms that you all share.
But we don't all share it.
Well, no, I mean, we don't share it, obviously.
So is it federalism for the Eurozone or federalism for the EU?
Look, the problem is that we don't share it, but we cannot interfere with their attempts to draw it together.
But he's not president of the Eurozone. No. He's president of the EU.
No, but what we've got to understand is their priorities as people trying to get out of a depression in many cases and trying to keep their currency together are different to our priorities. Now, I don't see Cameron having a very evolved chess game here. I don't see a person 10 moves ahead of anybody else. I see a man upturning the chessboard and saying, I'm not the kind of man who plays chess, because that's what he's read the British polls would like him to say. Yeah. And, that might you might well be right that plays well for him domestically.
Does it matter in the end, Mr. Juncker's appointment, in terms of Mr. Cameron's reform agenda and trying to get the repatriation of power. I mean, the people who will determine that in the end will be the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France. Does it really matter whether Mr. Juncker is there or not?
What does matter is the work programme that he is going to have to follow. And I anticipate, as we are sat here speaking now at this very moment in time, that is the very thing that is going to be being debated across in Belgium now. We have got to make sure that the work programme is right, and the other thing that we shouldn't lose sight of is that this is not the only top job that's on offer at the moment in Brussels. There are other very significant positions where if we can manoeuvre and get our people into place, we stand to benefit greatly. What is happening here, actually, I'm very encouraged by it. For the first time, we are seeing European politics being made transparent. When was the last time we saw this sort of debate taking place right across Europe about the types of personalities we need to have in these highly important positions?
It's hardly transparent with the federalists claiming that Mr. Juncker is the choice of the European voters. I mean, I'll wager that the number of voters in Germany who knew that Juncker was the candidate could fit into a sort of Munich beer cellar, and there'd still be room at the bar.
Just briefly, I want to ask Mr. Karim. You're the ECR, the Conservative grouping nominee for President of the European Parliament, right?
I am.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, is it?
Well, we've put forward a very strong programme to them, and the fact of the matter now,
didn't ask about
actually,
programme. I just said it's not going to happen.
The fact of the matter, Andrew, as I sit with you, is this: that yesterday evening, a very important publication across in Brussels called European Voice actually came out and said that the linkage of the European Parliament's presidency with the European Commission presidency by Martin Schulz is the wrong thing for him to do. And this is an exercise of deceit. So now it's up to the MEPs. They have a secret vote as to whether they simply file into line with this exercise of deceit, or do they stand for what European citizens want.
All right. Well, despite our scepticism, if you do get it, will you give us the first interview?
I'll be on the first train over, Andrew.
Yeah, after having seen our link to Brussels, I'm not surprised you come back on the train. Thank you very much.